Okay, we're recording now. And today is March 8th.
Is it 8th or 9th?
Yeah. 2010. Hey, you sit. Sit down. Sit. So let's have you, Mom, tell us what your name is and.
Okay, I'm Marvel Cooley Fenton. My parents were Marcus R. Cooley and Marvel Griffin Cooley. And I was born July the 9th, 1923. I think I was born at home in the house that we lived in that was, we always called Grandma and Great-Grandma Ann's house that was north of the store and the post office. And I don't remember much about my younger years before I started school in Newton. But I do remember that before I started school, I would spend a lot of time over at Grandma Cooley's house because she'd had a baby boy that was born 3 months before I was born. And just after his first birthday, shortly after his first birthday, when he was getting to that real cute age, walking and talking and being really cute, he got diarrhea. And they didn't know how to control it, and he died within 3 days of getting it. And so Grandma Cooley liked to have me come over and stay at her house a lot, since I was the same age as him.
Was that her last child?
Uh-huh. His name was Elias. And we do have a few pictures of him, but not very, of him just standing. Anyway, one thing I particularly remember was that Grandma Cooley would write. Uncle Hazen lived in Cedar City, and he was took care of the finances of the university in Cedar City, which was an extension from Utah State. And Grandma Cooley wrote him letters, and so she was writing him a letter one day, and she handed me a piece of paper while she was writing. She wrote her letter to him, and when she finished, she picked up my paper, which I'm sure I just scribbled on, and she read me what I had written to Uncle Hazen, because she told me to write to Uncle Hazen. So she read me what I wrote. She didn't ask me what I wrote. And she was a really good grandmother to us kids. Some things I do remember happening in Newton was I remember one time when Dad and some other, I don't know who all, but there was at least 2 or 3 others that were cleaning out the chicken coop, and so they were, not the chicken, I don't know, anyway, some building down there, and they were throwing out old straw and stuff, and they had pitchforks that they were throwing it out with, and for some reason I wanted to go in and talk to them. I don't know why, but I sat, instead of hollering at them and letting them know, I just stood there and I was trying to time when I could dash in between the pitchforks coming out. So all of a sudden I decided it was the right time, and I made a dash just as my dad took the pitchfork to pitch one out. And when he came out, I guess I was crying, and he carried me up to the house, and I remember him saying to Mother, well, this is one that I've killed. And when they looked at me, he thought he'd hit me right in the abdomen. Instead, he'd hit me just in the upper legs with the pitchfork.
So this is a very deep west room lagoon.
So how old were you then?
I don't know, it was probably about maybe 7 or 8.
Uh-huh.
Another thing I remember that you might be interested in was that my sister Mary, who was 4 years younger than me, she had really curly hair. Always, mine was straight as sticks, and hers was really pretty and curly. And Mother was out of the house, and when she came back in, Mary had cut her hair. And Mother said, "Oh, you cut your hair, why did you do that?" And she said, "I couldn't find the catalog."
Couldn't find what?
The catalog to cut out, so she cut her hair. And I think maybe you might be interested in my brother John, who was just 2 years younger than me as a young boy. He always wanted to go. This is before he was old enough to start school. He always wanted to go with Dad whenever he went with the truck to haul grain or whatever. And so one day he had just finished eating lunch, and he went outside and he saw that Dad was backing the truck out of the corral, which was across the street from us. And he went running towards it and tried to jump on the running board to get on the truck, and Dad didn't see him, but Ralph was there waiting to close the gate. And when he saw John fall, Ralph started waving his arms back and forth like this, and Dad quickly stopped the truck, and they got out and looked, and they saw him laying there right next to the tire, one of the back tires, and they looked on his shirt, and it had the whole mark of the tire going across it, so they could see something that he spit out of his mouth. It was probably just something he was eating from some. Anyway, I don't remember if they rushed him to the Old Logan, Smithfield, or whether they just checked him there, but they didn't find anything wrong with him, so they decided that later on that somehow the truck must have just caught his shirt and pulled it over there to make the track on it. And so I'm sure that was another time Dad thought he'd killed one of his kids. And then another thing that my brother John did before he was old enough to start school was he decided that he would go over and feed. Mother always would go feed, I think it was some heifers or anyway, some calves or something, while Dad was away at school, because he taught school over in Richmond, Utah. And so he went out there, didn't tell Mother what he was going to do, but went out there and he climbed up in the barn, and he got a great big long hay knife that has real sharp teeth on it. There was already hay down, but he didn't take the hay that was down. He took this to cut some down and ended up cutting a big gash in his leg, a big long gash. They had to, and somehow or other Mother heard him crying and went and got him and took him over, and they put a lot of stitches in his leg, and they told her to, okay, now you need to keep him real quiet and not be real active, and put a big cast on his leg too. Well, he was an impossible child to keep quiet. He'd watched for a little while. We didn't have a real sofa in the living room, but there was a cot there, and that's where he was supposed to lay. And right outside the window was some robins that had built a nest, and he'd watch them a little bit, but then pretty soon he'd be off of the cot down on the floor. Mother'd have to go back and put him back up, and she was so glad when they said that it was okay to take off the cast and take out the stitches, because it was impossible to keep him laying there still.
So how old was he when this
Well,
happened?
he wasn't old enough to go to school yet, so he was probably about maybe 5.
So when did your dad get the house on that we see up here on the wall here? When did he get this house here?
When the first year that I started high school was when we moved out there.
Uh-huh.
And so most of my growing up years in Newton was living at the house north of the store and the post office. It was 2 blocks north of there.
Uh-huh.
There's a house that we have a picture of. The only picture we have is of Ann Hazen standing in front of it. The house originally belonged to her,
Uh-huh.
and Dad had bought it from her. Things I do remember.
Now, Ann Hazen this was.
She was our great grandmother.
So this was
the one married to Andrew Wood Cooley.
So this would have been Marcus's
Grandmother.
grandmother. So this would be your grandpa's. I mean, this would be your great grandma.
Uh-huh.
And you remember her?
Oh yes,
very well?
I remember her really well. She lived to be, I don't think she died till after Dad and I were married, or right just before.
Uh-huh.
I don't remember going to her funeral, so maybe it was after we were married and away from home.
Uh-huh.
But I saw her lots of times over to Grandma Cooley's house.
So tell us, let's back up here a little bit. Tell us about your brothers and sisters, or just
Okay.
where you fit in the family.
Okay, my brother Ralph, Marcus Ralph, was 2 years older than me. So I was the second child, and then my brother John was the third child. He was 2 years younger than me. Mary was the fourth child, so she was 4 years younger than me. And Audrey was next, and she was 3 years younger, I think, than Mary. And then Bob was born when I was about in 7th or 8th grade. And I remember the day he was born because at the Newton School, every spring we went on what they called the May Walk. And his birthday's in April, so I guess we went early that year. But we went over I guess we were taken out to Grandma Griffin's house, and then she fixed us a lunch. And I remember that where I went with the group was we went climbed up on top of the little mountain we called it, Dad called it the Trenton Hill. It was between Newton and Trenton, and that's where we went for our May walk. And when I got home, then Mother had Bob. That was the day he was born. And I think his birthday is April 12th or something like that. Sometime in April. Another time that we went on a May walk, we walked to the west of Newton and up through some farm and stuff, and up on top of a hill that was called Molly's Nipple. And I remember going there.
That's the one that's just to the south of where the Bear River goes through the canyon, right?
It's just to
to the north of it.
To the north of where the Bear River goes through the canyon. You can see it from Newton's side, and you can see it from over if you're over going down the other side in the other valley.
Uh-huh. And then you have two more brothers and sisters, right?
Okay, then Noel and Ruth were born after we moved out to the house that everybody that's old enough remembers going to see Grandma and Grandpa Cooley, the house that was out on the main street in the corner just before you turn to go to Cass Junction. Noel was born at Christmas time, just before Christmas, his birthday. That's why he was named Noel, and Noel and Ruth were the only ones that Mother went to the hospital for. All the rest of her children were born at home. But she was in the hospital for Christmas, and I remember that, and Dad always kept all the Santa Claus gifts and all the stuff like that stored over to Grandma Cooley's house, and so he would always go over there on the day of Christmas Eve and be gone. And I remember I was the oldest girl, and I was in charge of seeing that everything got done that Mother would have done, like the floors mopped and waxed and everybody cleaned up and the kids put to bed. And I remember I got that all done and got everybody in bed, and after they'd all gone to bed, I remembered I'd forgot to have them hang up any stockings. And we didn't have special Christmas stockings, we just used our own, so I went and found some for each one of them and took them and put them in the living room and where the Christmas tree was, so that they'd be there when Dad came home. But he was born, I think, 4 or 5 days before Christmas. I was trying to remember exactly what day his birthday is. And Ruth was born a couple of years after Noel. And she was, I think, 4 years old when Dad and I got married. So, and Noel was maybe 6 when we got married.
So so when you went to school, you went to school through how old, how
I
long?
went to school in Newton from first grade and second grade you went a half a day to school. And then third and fourth grade were in the same room, fifth and sixth grade were in the same room, and seventh and eighth grade were in the same room.
So they had how many rooms in the school?
Well, one room for first grade and one room for third and fourth, and one for fifth and sixth, and one for seventh and eighth, and then they had a small gymnasium.
Uh-huh.
And when I was in the fourth grade, we moved to Logan and spent the winter in Logan, and I went up to the Whittier School, which was 2 blocks north of Grandma Cooley's house.
Uh-huh.
And I
So your whole family moved to Logan then?
Yes.
Why was that?
Because my grandfather Griffin, who had a tumor on the brain, was dying, and they were living in a rented house that was just up about a block away from Grandma Cooley's house. And Mother would go over to help her mother with him while he was dying. And
So,
he died in December of that year.
uh-huh. So Grandma Cooley lived in Logan for a while then?
You mean your mother?
No, your grandmother Cooley.
Oh, my grandmother Cooley lived in Logan all the time that I remember. She took boarders. Grandpa Cooley got rheumatoid arthritis when my dad was probably about 6 years or 4 years old, or 5 or 6 years old, because his brother Hazen, who's 4 years younger than him, never remembered seeing his dad walk, but my dad did. And he got rheumatoid arthritis, and it eventually got so bad they put him in a wheelchair. And Grandma Cooley took care of him. And they moved to Logan, and she took about 8 to 10 boys to feed them breakfast and supper and furnish them a bed. And she would cook breakfast. She'd have breakfast on the table by 7 o'clock in the morning. And it wasn't just cereal and eggs. There would be a real breakfast and different things she'd fix every morning, and then she'd have supper on the table by 6 o'clock at night.
And these boarders boys were going to school?
They were all boys.
They're going to school?
Going to Utah State University.
Uh-huh.
And Grandpa, she'd get up and fix breakfast for them, and then I remember being over there a lot. I remember after breakfast, she'd clear off the table and wash the dishes, and then she'd go upstairs to see what condition those rooms were upstairs, straighten up whatever needed to be straightened, and then she'd come downstairs and get Grandpa up, and she'd have to lift him off of the bed over to a chair that had a pot underneath it so he could go to the bathroom, and then she'd wipe him off and bathe him a little bit and bring him in and cook his breakfast, so he'd get breakfast about 11 o'clock. And then another thing that she did was that she washed and ironed shirts for all these boys, and she charged them 10 cents a shirt for doing that. And that was in the days when you had to starch the shirts and iron them with an iron. And of course the dishes she washed by hand, because there didn't seem to have a dishwasher either.
Well, I remember the iron that she had when I saw her there in Newton, was she put on the old wood-burning stove to heat it up. Was that the type of iron that she used? Or?
Some of the times, I guess, but I don't particularly remember her using that. I do remember that sometimes she would get up like 3 o'clock in the morning and do the washing and take it out and hang it on the clothesline before she got breakfast. And she was a real tall lady and with long legs. I remember when she would go to town, she lived at 172 East 3rd North, and So you'd walk 2 blocks to get down to the street, to the main street, and then you'd have to walk about 2 or 3 blocks over to get to where the stores were. And when I'd go with her to go to town, I'd have to run practically to keep up with her. She'd walk so fast. I like to go over to spend time at my grandmother's place. That's where I went and learned how to roller skate. Because in Newton we didn't have any sidewalks, but they were just dirt paths, and so I learned how to roller skate over to her place, and I thought that was great. I'd go over there and roller skate up to the temple, where the temple was. There was a hospital up there also. It was a block, I think, up and across, and then it was up a hill, because the temple sat on the top of the hill. And then I'd skate sometimes down the same side that the temple was on, and then I'd have to get going so fast I'd have to go into the grass to slow myself down. But if I went down the south side of the temple, this when I'd do it on the north side of the temple. If I went down the south side, there was a boulevard, and it kind of curved and was slow, and I could skate all the way down to the bottom of that. I also like to skate to the library to get books, to read, because we didn't have a library in Newton, and I could get a lot of books to read and bring them home. Grandma said she liked me to come over and stay at her place because I wasn't a big nuisance to her all the time. When I didn't like school in Logan. I guess I was too shy and didn't make friends easy, and I felt like I never had a friend in the whole grade there. It seemed kind of really different. I didn't really like school in Logan. John was, he was really excited. He liked it real well. His teachers did things that he didn't get to do at Newton. And my brother Ralph couldn't go to the same school as we did because they didn't have room for him. And he had to walk down to a school that was, he'd have to walk clear down to town and all the way across town and then to the west. They had sent him to a school down there. And one time he was walking home and he saw in the window a place where they had put something in a bottle, and they said if you guessed how much of it was, whatever, I can't remember whether it was like beans or whatever it was, in a small jar they had sitting in the window, and if you guessed how much was in it, you could put in an estimate, and they gave a prize for that. And he kept looking at it every day as he'd go by, and he got whatever it was that they had in that bottle, something the same size as it, and the same size bottle, and he took it home, and when he got home, he put it into a bottle at Grandma Cooley's house, and he counted all the stuff that it had in it, and then he put in an estimate to it, and he took first prize, and he won a round wood table, a really nice round wood table that they kept in their, that they had years later in their house in Kaysville. After he got married, it was given to him to have for his own. But everybody was so surprised that he won that prize.
So,
What did you spend the money for?
well, he didn't get money, he won a table.
He won a table, about the size of this one here, a little bit, only that it was a little more curved.
Who's got it now?
It was, last time I saw it, it was still at their house in Kaysville.
At Martha's house?
Uh-huh. One other thing that I liked over at Grandma Cooley's house was that when Ralph was there with me, Uncle Hazen, I guess they had bought some, they were little concrete blocks that were different shapes. They were not just square, some of them were elongated, some of them were triangles, and some were squares. And And Ralph would put them together, and he could build really a lot of different creations with putting these concrete blocks together. Grandma Cooley, the only ones she ever let play with it, I think, was Ralph and me, because we were always so careful with it.
They were concrete.
They were little concrete blocks, but different colors. And they belonged to Uncle Hazen, and Grandma Cooley still had them there because he wasn't married then. One thing I should tell you about is that for Christmas, we never got hardly anything for gifts for Christmas when I think back, compared to what kids get today. I remember one year that, well, we got maybe a doll or something like that some years, but we wouldn't get a doll every year. But anyway, I had a doll, and my mother's sister, Mina, made some clothes for my doll and gave it to me for Christmas, and I was so excited with them and everything. And I guess I must have wrapped them up in the Sunday funny papers that were laying there, and Dad didn't notice, and I guess built the fire with them the next morning. And because we could never find the doll clothes after the first day.
Huh.
And I was so disappointed. And my Aunt Mina, another thing that we always called her Aunt Mina. And I remember one time she was the PE teacher over at North Cache High School for the girls. And I remember one day that she took me to high school with her and let me go spend the day over there with her. I don't remember how old I was, probably wasn't in school, I guess, at that time, but I was really excited because she did that. And I remember that she was she made hats and different things. Both of my grandmothers were really good seamstresses. Grandma Griffin could look at a dress in a window at a store and kind of look it over, and then she could go home and cut out another dress to look just like that and sew it together. Grandma Cooley often kids today wouldn't like this, but she would unpick some older person's dress and remake it into a dress for us. And I had several dresses like that I wore even to high school and to college. The first bought dress that I remember having was when I graduated from 8th grade. My mother and Dad went and bought me a really nice dress. And then after my first year of college, I got a job working in Ogden, and then I went and bought me some clothes that I bought. I remember buying a suit and a couple of skirts and blouses. But other than that, I wore these made-over dresses. And so we lived during the Depression. Should I tell you about that?
Sure.
Okay. We didn't really, I guess because everybody else was as poor as we were, we didn't really know that we were in a depression. We didn't realize as children that we were in a depression, but I was born in 1923, and the Depression started, I think, in 1933 or 32, right in there. My dad taught school, and he made $1,200 a year teaching school and high school. And he said in the spring when school was ending, they were setting up the contracts for the next year, and they raised their salaries up to $1,800 a year. But by the time that they started school in the fall, the county came and said, "We haven't collected enough money, we can't pay you that much, we'll still pay you the $1,200. And then by spring, in February, they came and they told the teachers that they didn't have enough money to even pay them, did they want to quit, to end school right then? Or did the teachers want to take what they would call a voucher that they could cash later? They could cash it at the banks at that time, or they could cash it later after the county collected the money. If they cashed it at the banks deducted 25% of the voucher. But my dad was able to save all of his because he said in the fall he had sold his wheat for $2.50 a bushel, but spring it was selling for 50 cents a bushel. He had also sold 5 heifers that he hadn't planned to sell, but some guy came and wanted them so bad, Dad sold them, and he'd been able to pay the amount that he owed on his farm for the farm debt. And so he wasn't pressured for money, and he was able to save his until the county actually collected the money. We didn't feel like we were, we had plenty of food to eat because we canned peas, actually in cans, we canned peas, beans, and corn, and peaches and pears. And then we put cherries up in bottles and raspberries in bottles, and then we had milk because we had milk cows. We had all the milk we wanted to drink, and then we could get butter from where they took the milk to. And then Dad would take the other things that they needed. Oh, we raised our own beef. We had beef and chicken and pigs, so we had plenty of meat. But other things that he needed from the stores, he would go over and he'd ask the store if they could use some flour, and if they said yes, that they good, he'd say, well, could I take my wheat to the mill and trade you the flour for something else? And they'd say yes. So he'd ask them what brand of flour did they want, and then he'd go over to the mill where they
Cash Junction.
no, it was wherever it was. Anyway, I thought it was closer to Logan, but anyway, they had all the brands of flour sacks on the floor, and so he'd tell them which brand of flour to put it into, and they'd grind up the wheat into flour, and then he'd take it back to the store and trade it for stuff that we needed from the store. But I know that in the East, we'd hear about and see maybe a picture in the newspaper about people standing in long lines to go get a bowl of soup, something to eat, as they were so many people out of work. What do you remember about the Depression, Dad?
Me? Well, Dad had a steady job, so I guess we were pretty well. Dad, I think, made 50 cents an hour. Finally got up to 65 cents an hour, and we were living, well, the Depression, I guess, started in what year?
1933, I think.
29 was the stock market crash, but
Yeah, the stock market crashed then. I could tell you one thing that happened in our family when that occurred. My grandmother Cooley's brother ran a herd of sheep, and he sold his sheep for $50,000, and he took the money and put it in the bank, and the next morning the bank closed, and he was never able to get a dime back from that $50,000 he put in the bank.
yeah, that's pretty devastating.
Yes, it was.
So where were you living during the Depression, Dad?
1933. Let's see, we moved from Iona. Let's see, 1930. 37,
So-
I guess, is when we moved from Iona to
To Trenton?
Trenton.
So you were in Iona
We were
for
there 4 years before.
Well, But you would have been in Iona when the Depression was
In
on.
1933, I guess, when we moved to Iona.
Uh-huh.
And we had a home that was paid for, or that was getting, Dad was getting enough out of it and renting that we didn't rent it. It just sat there on 754 Parker's Lane in Salt Lake when we moved up there, and we had a bathtub there and running water and inside toilet and bath. And when we moved to Iona, we moved into the railroad station agent, and there was one room beside the kitchen, and then next to the kitchen was the railroad telegraph office, and next to the telegraph office was the waiting room. And Lloyd and I slept in the waiting room, and we had no heat in the house at all, except the one stove in the kitchen. And it was so cold there, we had to haul our water from the service station up. First we had a cesspool, not a cesspool, but a water tank, a buried water tank, and we used that. We had to pump our water out of that, and until we discovered that there was some mice floating in the top den, we quit using that water. But anyway, it was so cold in the wintertime, when we'd get up, we'd have our water bucket in the kitchen. There'd be ice on top of the water bucket. It'd be freezing there. And Dad and Mother believed in sanitation. Each one of us had a cup to drink out of, and we'd take the dipper out of the water bucket and put it in break the ice in the water bucket, put cold water in our glasses. And our source of heat was a pot-belly stove in the kitchen area, which was actually open to the railroad office. And there was a board about 5 foot square that had covered with metal sheeting, so that when you're changing putting coal in it and pulling out the clinkers out of the stove that fall there, they could pick them up with tweezers so that wouldn't catch the house on fire. And when we were there, Daniel and Eldon were born in the house there at the railroad station at Iona, and Dad fixed a couple ropes hanging down from the ceiling in the bedroom, so the baby crib was hanging there so that the kids and the babies could sleep in the crib, and the youngest one with Mom and Dad. And Lloyd and I slept out in the waiting room, and we'd heat the bricks in the, I thought we had an oven there next to the, I think we had a little cooking stove there that had an oven in it. We'd put bricks in there and then heat them up. Then we'd wrap them up with cloth and take them and put them in the foot of our bed to keep warm because we were out in the waiting room. And the railroad tracks were as close to our bedroom as your closest driveway here is. And so when the trains went by, first it would wake us up, and it got so the train could go through the night. We went in here, go through it, and yet it was only short distance on. But we enjoyed the 4 years there. I started the 7th grade, and the 7th grade was on the one side of the room, and the 8th grade was on the other side of the room. And so by the time I got through the 7th grade, I'd heard all 8th grade lessons, so it was real easy to just, and old Mr. Truman, he was the teacher, and they really didn't teach much. They'd have lessons assigned, but most of those lessons we got, he read the Zane Graves books to us, and sometimes he'd start in the morning reading one of those books, and he'd still be reading the books to finish when time to go home from school.
You want me to tell you a little bit about, we had a little better living conditions than Dad did. We lived in a house that did have a bathroom in it, and it had running water in the sink, and but we had a coal stove that Mother cooked on in the kitchen, and in the living room there was a stove that you could make a fire in the stove, but it didn't last all through the night. We slept upstairs in 2 bedrooms. The girls slept in one bedroom and the boys in another bedroom. I remember there were 2 double beds in the bed that the girls slept in, and then there was one bed in that the boys slept in, and the only heat that we had was the stovepipe that went up through the room, so it was cold up
In
there.
the stairway, you let the heat go from,
Well, the stairway didn't, the stairway went up and made a bend, so it didn't make a very good carrying of the heat, and there was no heat in Mother and Dad's bedroom. They didn't have a stove in there either, so they'd open the kitchen door to warm up their bed a little bit.
you had an indoor bathtub and an indoor toilet.
We had an indoor bathtub and an indoor toilet.
Do you have a hot water heater?
I don't remember how we heated the water. I know that we had hot water, but I don't know how it was heated for the bathroom.
We had a tea kettle, and we had a,
In the kitchen, of course, was the coal stove that I don't remember carrying the water into the tub, so I don't remember how they heated it. But one thing I do remember was that it would get so hot in there, and when Mother would be canning in the summertime, that it was just really, really hot. And to do, the canning, we didn't buy the the things that you put cans in until after we moved out to the other house, but.
So these are canning with bottles?
But it was bottles,
Uh-huh.
and we had a raspberry patch, and Mother would pick get up early in the morning, go out and pick the raspberries, and then start putting them into bottles. And I remember they'd heat up the water and pour them over the bottles of raspberries, and then they'd put them in a big copper kettle that was full of really hot water, and then they'd of course they'd have the bottles hot by the hot water they'd put into them, and they'd put them in that with a lid on it and cover it over, and then that would cook them. And I guess that she must have cooked some of the others, on the stove, and then canned them that way. But one time some guys came by with an electric stove, and they said, "Is this the Marcus Cooley home?" And she said yes, and she said, "Well, here's an electric stove for you." And she said, "That couldn't be ours." And we had one of the few telephones in Newton, but she called Dad over to school and said, "Somebody came by here, someone's here with an electric stove which they say is for our house." And he says, "It is, I bought it for you, so let them install it." And she was really thrilled to get that. But we also went to school with those 4 grades, and one thing that was different was that all of the chairs, all the desks were bolted to the floor. They had them like a long wooden rail that went down, and you'd be sitting with the front of your desk would be the back of the chair of the desk in front of you, and then there'd be an aisle between you and the next one. And so I was like Dad. By the time you took 5th grade, you knew what the 6th grade lessons were, and when you were in 7th grade, you knew what the 8th grade lessons were. So school was never very hard, but we did get taught. We were not. Our teachers didn't read us books in there. Amos Griffin was the 8th grade teacher, and he did try to do a good job of teaching, but some of the kids, I guess, didn't catch on very fast, and their parents must not have helped them very much. But I remember that there was a girl named Eva Christiansen and me in the 8th grade, and we could be through with our lessons so fast that he was always trying to find something for us to do. So sometimes he'd send us down to the 4th grade to help the teacher, and sometimes he'd send us, another time he sent us out to straighten up a closet that had books and papers and stuff in it. And I remember he'd sometimes have working on times tables or division problems, and the first one to answer the question, well, I remember getting sent home half hour before school for lunch, because I was always, and probably Eva the same way, because we could always answer our questions real fast, and then he sent us home.
Where is she now?
She married somebody who lived in Salt Lake. The last time I saw her was at a class reunion, our 50th class reunion, just before they tore down part of North Cache High School. It was a real shock to go to high school and find out how hard the classes were.
So Dad, tell us about a little bit more about your time there in Idaho. What kind of things did you do?
About how your mother, how you had parties at your house and your mother made ice cream and stuff.
The railroad had a train went through from Idaho Falls, went through Iona and up through the valley, and it went clear up to West Yellowstone. And the railroad track that went up to West Yellowstone actually went up the west side of that Buffalo River subdivision. The tracks had been removed when we were up there living the last time here, but we had free railroad passes, and I think only once did we ride the train all the way up to Yellowstone and back. But getting back to where we lived, I said we had a waiting room, but then there was the freight room, and for a while Lloyd and I had our beds out in the freight room.
Did you have free ice or something?
Oh, we had free ice there. They had an ice house there in the winter time. They'd bring the ice in there in blocks, and they'd put sawdust in the bottom, set the ice on sawdust and up the sides, and they'd have all these blocks of ice in there and lids so you could get in. And so we had ice the whole year round. And our friends, people, they had cows and had the milk. Mother knew how to make ice cream, and we had a hand-turned ice cream freezer, and we had a lot of parties at our place. Our friends would bring the milk, and Mother would put it together and make the ice cream, and then we'd get the ice out of the ice house. And so we had a lot of parties there with kids our age. We have maybe a dozen kids or more. They'd bring the milk and the ingredients for the ice cream, and Mother would make it, and we'd take turns of freezing it. And every Saturday, and Dad got off on Saturday and Sundays, and all the time we were there, we would go hunting and fishing on Saturday and Sundays.
You also went skiing or something behind horses.
No, we learned how to ski because people had bobsleds and team of horses, and the roads were kept open for just one lane, and the snow would be, I don't know how they plowed the road. They must have plowed them somehow, but we'd hook ropes on the back of the bobsled, and we'd ski behind them and go over the drifts along the side of the road. So we learned how to run.
So this was a horse-drawn sleigh?
Horse-drawn sleigh. And I remember one time we were down in the main part of Iona, and we were headed north on the Iona North Road going now, and the team ran away. I don't know whether the reins broke or what. We couldn't stop the reins at all of the horses, and I think one time one horse went on one side of the pole and one went on the other side, and it broke the tongues off. But the one time I remember is that the horse was running away, and there was 2 or 3 of us still on the sleigh, and we stayed behind it, and the horse was headed back to where they lived, and the horses ran across the bridge, and they slipped on the bridge and went off into the water and broke all harnesses and loose, and they ran on back to the house up there, or just to the east of the railroad track. Or it was Leon, Rachel Eggleston's place. And we had a lot of fun parties on bobsleds. And
So were these your horses or somebody else's horses?
we didn't have any horses. Oh, we had a friend there in the college. There was one Walker, Ovid Walker. His parents lived just south of the railroad track on the South Iona Road, as it's known now. And the people would sell them horses when they get too old and to use for anything, and they run a fox farm, so he used the horses for the feed. They fed the old horses, but they had the better ones that Lloyd and I used to go there. We'd each get they'd get us a horse. Sometimes it's the horse between us, and we did a lot of riding bareback on these horses up in the foothills of east of Iona, up Black Canyon. And
What kind of a vehicle did you have to go fishing with?
well, we finally got a Model A Ford. Before then, we had some old Ford, but I guess Dad, I can't remember the first, but they got a Model A Ford that we would load as many people we could get in that car. I don't remember how we, seemed like we always had about a dozen people going up on weekends, going fishing or.
Probably not that many.
Where did you go fishing?
Up in Willow Creek, out near Bone, Idaho.
Uh-huh. So how many miles was that from Iona?
Oh, 4 or 5 miles. It's up the hill. You go up the Lone Road to it, and they're up there's a little store called the Bone Store, and then about a quarter of a mile down on the Willow Creek bridge, we'd go there fishing. And I remember my dad one time we were over there fishing, and my dad was jumping from rock to rock, and he jumped from one rock to another, and the rock he jumped onto was not a rock. It was dead sheep floating. He just running. But we learned what rattlesnakes look like too, because we ran across rattlesnakes a few times there. I don't know how it was. A couple of times we took, maybe other people had a car that had I remember sometimes there was 6 or 8 or 10 of us that go up there swimming. We were just in the, well see, I went there 4 years last year. I went 7th and 8th grade and the freshman and sophomore year of high school.
Uh-huh. How big was your high school?
Well, I was the president of the sophomores, and I think there were 20 of us.
Uh-huh.
My high school had less than 100, I think, in it. I was too small to get on the basketball team, too small to get on the baseball team, and when they choose up sides, I was never chosen. I remember Brother Paul, he's going to school up there, and it was Lloyd and Paul and I when we went to school. Paul was big enough, he went to I think about the 1st grade. He was 7 years, he was born in 1920, he was born on February the 11th, 1927, and he enjoyed turning these wheels on the canals, and he'd go by and he'd turn those wheels, and what those wheels would do, it would open the branch lines of the canal and let the water go down the ditches. Finally, after they caught him doing it, I guess they decided they were going to put a chain and a padlock there so people couldn't turn the water down the wrong ditch.
I should tell you one thing that we like to do in Newton. This house that we lived in north of the store, across the street was a big, the main ditch that came with irrigation water from the north, which probably was about 2 feet of, maybe not even 2 feet of water in it. and it was
4
probably
feet
about
wide.
6 feet wide. And then the ditches were, that were right next to it were concreted, real narrow ditches, and we like to go. You want me to stop?
No, we've got about 40 seconds.
We like to go up and sit in the area where the water came out of the big ditch to go into the smaller ditch. We could sit there and then we'd hold the water back and another person would go sit on the other side of the road where the water came out from underneath of the road. And when we'd stand up and the water would come down and push them down the ditch a little ways, I'm sure that the people that were irrigating really liked us.
Okay, we got to stop now.